Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the A to Z Poll podcast. My name is Zachary Siega, and I'll be your host. If you like college football and you want to be up to date on what's happening in the college football landscape, consider subscribing. I'd really appreciate it. All right, let's get into it this week. Uh, this week, I got to go to see Utah State take on Temple. Pretty fun atmosphere. They play at Lincoln Financial Field, and for those who are not familiar, that is where the Philadelphia Eagles play. It was nice meeting a lot of new people, and when you do go to these games, like I've been going to, this being my 4th game this season, you meet so many new people. And sometimes you get to meet, the family and parents of the players playing. And this week I got to meet uh some of the family of freshman linebacker for Temple, Aiden Britton. It was really nice to talk with everyone, really get a feel for for how people have more of a stake in this game than just maybe being a fan of the sport. And it's cool to really humanize this and remember why college football is so great and why we all really like it. But next week I will not be at a game, but I will be at games shortly after. And when I do, I hope to see you there. All right, diving into this list, the first 8 teams did not actually change this week. So starting up at number one, if we remember from last week, Texas still remains the number one spot. They took down Louisiana Monroe 51-3. Arch Manning still looked really good. He did have 2 interceptions, went for 258 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions. Uh, Complementing that was Jadon Blue going for 124 yards and having 4 total touchdowns at running back. It really feels like the depth of this Texas team is really just shining through in a big way. They were able to beat, an FBS level opponent 51-3 without their starting quarterback or starting running back. Not many teams can do that, frankly. And their defense held Louisiana Monroe to just 111 total yards on offense. It's passing and rushing. So, I mean, this Texas team is going to continue to roll. I do think that Quinn Ewers will be back probably at their next game, um, if not the one after that. But hey, they do know if they have any real complications with Ewers in his return. Arch Manning is a very valid compensatory quarterback pick. All right, moving into number two. Ohio State beat Marshall 49-14. I guess nobody took Marshall's head coach up on the free tutors biscuit world. Quinshon Judkins and Travion Henderson combined for 249 total rushing yards and 4 touchdowns. Holy cow, that is a crazy running back tandem. That complemented with the fact that Emeka Egbuka and Jeremiah Smith also combined for 187 yards and 2 touchdowns. That is 2 positional groups that could very well be the best in the country. And as long as Will Howard can keep his head on and do what he needs to do, I'm pretty sure, a blind mouse can lead them to a national championship. Now, Will Howard's very talented, not trying to take anything away from him. He had that 1 interception that was asked about in his post-game interview, but I think that, at this point, it's still a little bit of figuring out the kinks of what works and what doesn't work. And I think that Will Howard is going to be just fine at the Ohio State. Right now is just as good a chance to win the national title as almost any other team up top in this list. All right, number three, as we remember from last year, we got the Miami Hurricanes with a 50-15 victory over South Florida. Cam Ward is got to be my Heisman leader right now. 404 yards, 3 touchdowns. He did have an interception, but I mean, he just looks so comfortable out there. Watching him move around, it looks like that he's just going at a different speed than everyone else. This team right now should be completely in line to win the ACC, and I don't really see any reason outside of injuries why they should slow down. They did kind of start the game a little slow, but I mean, South Florida gave Alabama a fit as well, and and Cam Ward and his Miami team ended up beating them worse. If you haven't gotten a chance yet, go watch Cam Ward play. It is really a thing of art. Moving on, number four, my second rated SEC team at the moment, but that would be the Tennessee Volunteers. I don't really even have that much to say about it. They walked into Norman, beat them 25-15, and it felt way worse than that. Nico did have a couple turnovers, but he's a really, really young quarterback, and that's expected, right? That's expected from a young quarterback right now. The fact that they went in and that defense absolutely shut down the Sooners. They went through a couple different quarterbacks during that time, and Nico did look really, really good. If they can continue this and further into their SEC play, I have no doubt that we will get to see Tennessee do some very, very special things. Now for 5 and 6, those who remember last week might remember I have Georgia 5 and Alabama 6. Neither one played a game this week, and both are playing each other this week. This is a huge game for everybody. Both teams really want to win. Georgia remembers the last 6 games where have been 1-5 on them recently, and Alabama wants to prove that they haven't really taken a step back without Saban. Now, I while listening to the Joel Klatt show this morning, I heard a very interesting take on who this game means more for. Initially, as was stated this morning, you would think, okay, Kalen DeBoer, new head coach, probably got a lot to prove. But this feels like a pretty forgivable loss, especially for a first year head coach. Now, it's Alabama. You're not in a normal situation. But, if you get the biggest dog in the park and you don't know how to control it yet, it might break loose a little bit. Alabama has a couple secondary problems, and Kirby Smart seems like the kind of coach who should be able to take full advantage of these issues. Now, on the other hand, Kirby has had a Nick Saban problem. And if Kirby loses, that's not a Nick Saban problem because Nick Saban isn't the head coach. This is an Alabama problem. I don't think he can afford to have an Alabama problem right now. At least not at this point. With the schedule that Georgia has the rest of the year, if they lose this game, I mean, it's no guarantee that they can run the table. Who knows what's going to happen after that? So, really, for both of these teams, it means a lot that they win. I think it means more than what we're thinking. I think that thinking that there's a 12-team playoff almost makes the regular season less important. I think is that's not true, right? Georgia could very easily slip from first round bye to away playoff game, and I don't think that Georgia wants that. That being said, Alabama, in what feels like the most vulnerable they've been in 15 years, also don't want to have to do that. So if Alabama can get through this, it's going to look really, really bad on Kirby. But if Georgia gets through this, although it might make Alabama's path a little more difficult, I don't really see how this makes Kalen DeBoer any less credible. Now, if Kalen goes through and wins this, he might then be able to take this win and ride it through recruiting and make it look way better and make this team really, really good. Only the future will tell. I will absolutely be watching this game on Saturday, and I hope that you guys do as well. Number 7, Ole Miss. They beat Georgia Southern 52-6. They're just still putting up ridiculous numbers. And really 4, 5, 6, and 7, Tennessee, Alabama, Georgia, and Ole Miss. A couple things different this year, and we could shuffle this group up a lot, right? I mean, Georgia was a play away from having a loss this season. Alabama, a couple plays away from making a lot of these games look way closer than they were. And Ole Miss is playing about as good as they can. I'm pretty much just putting them there off reputation at this point. I mean, Jackson Dart, again, nearly 400 yards and 4 touchdowns. I really don't see how you can ask for more production out of a player right now. And he's absolutely on my Heisman watch list. And I think that he should be on yours too if you're making one. But right now, Ole Miss is absolutely a team to beat and definitely a contender out there. Number 8, Oregon. They did not have a game this week, but look, the last time we saw them, they looked exactly like the Oregon that we thought we were going to see in the beginning of the year. And if they could continue to look like this, I mean, they have UCLA coming next week. Um, I don't see why anybody has any doubts at this point about Oregon. I mean, they're gonna have to play Ohio State in a few weeks, but I think people were expecting them to lose that anyway. But if they play like they did against Oregon State, who knows what'll happen. Their offensive line finally looks cohesive and kind of just the same thing we talked about last week. Number 9, Penn State. The final score does not matter. Penn State put up 718 yards on Kent State this week and only allowed 67. That was a nearly 100-year record, 100-year Penn State program record that they beat this week. Um, they look great. Obviously, to put up 718 yards, you got to look great. They look great. Everything was clicking. They were firing on all cylinders. Exactly what you would expect from Penn State versus Kent State, but it maybe even surpassed expectations. They have Illinois next week. Uh, right? I believe they have Illinois next week. If they play like they did, I mean they shouldn't have a problem. But then again, I underestimated Illinois last week, so we'll see what happens. Utah coming in with Zach Wilson's brother Isaac Wilson and taking care of business against what, like I say this every week, but what I assumed was the second best team in the Big 12. I'm really not sure what it is after this week, what the second best team is in the Big 12, but clearly Utah is the best team in the Big 12. I mean, if with a backup quarterback, you're beating teams and it's looking really good, when they get their starting quarterback back, it should be a wash. But frankly, if I'm Kyle Whittingham, the Big 12 is the least of my concerns at the moment. If he gets Cam Rising back, he should absolutely be able to make the playoffs, and maybe even win a couple games there. Uh, Last week I said that without Cam Rising, the season could turn into a wash, but it seems like Isaac Wilson is a very serviceable backup and a very serviceable quarterback, and we could see a lot of really good things from this team, assuming that it all goes according to plan. All right, Missouri. They dropped 2 spots this week, uh, barely beating Vanderbilt off a missed field goal, 30-27. If guys, you have such an easy schedule comparatively to almost everyone else. Please don't ruin this. Missouri has a great opportunity to go undefeated this year, but if they play like they did on Saturday, they're not. They're just not going to play. They're just not going to win uh, all the games. But if they can play like the level that we think they can play it and how they did a lot of the time last year, I think we're going to see a Missouri team that could very well find themselves in an SEC championship purely based off the fact that they don't have the schedule difficulty to kick them out of it. Last week, I kind of excused them a little bit with the Boston College close one because BC is a really good team and Bill O'Brien's a really good coach. But this Vanderbilt team is not one that should have been giving him a fit this aggressive. Um, Louisville, they beat Georgia Tech 31-19 last week. Tyler Shaw and Ja'Cory Brooks is the connection, really, that I thought Noah Fafita and Tetairoa McMillan were going to be this year. And while that is still a very good combination, this Louisville team and with Tyler Shaw and Ja'Cory Brooks is looking really insane. They're easily one of the best teams in the ACC right now, and I don't really know outside of maybe Clemson, which we'll talk about later, if there's another team that's going to be able to challenge them underneath of Miami. Um, we'll get a good test of Louisville coming into after this week as they have the Fighting Irish. And a team that they probably should not underestimate. I mean, the Irish are a very good team, and as we'll talk about later, Riley Leonard had his best week yet. So if he can get his feet under him, it should be a very different team than we saw that lost to Northern Illinois. But at the same time, this Louisville team that we saw last year kind of like barely eke out of games and get through there, you know, uh, get some of these wins in a toughed out manner, are winning games so much more convincingly and dominant this year that I don't see a way that I don't know if they're going to lose this game. And every time I've made a claim this year, I've been pretty wrong. So I'm not going to this time. I'm going to say it could be either team's game, and I'm just going to be really excited to watch it. Number 13, Michigan. I was wrong. I was wrong. I'll say it 20 more times. Uh, they beat USC 27-24. Kyle Mullings has really secured his spot as the premier back on this team, and Michigan State seems to have found an identity. They rushed for 290 yards collectively on the ground, and Alex Orji, who got the start this week, only threw for like 40 or something like that. I didn't write it down. I don't remember off the top of my head. But Sharon Moore seems to have found himself an identity that at least in the short term works, right? We've seen now a one for one game where they won. Now, if Kellel Ware doesn't break that at the Kellel Mullings, sorry, doesn't break that at the end of the game, obviously they probably have a much tougher time winning. But look, they need to play into their strengths, and their strengths right now are not quarterback throwing outside threats. I mean, it's really not even tight end. Colson Loveland hasn't even played that well. It's winning in the trenches and being able to and being that kind of team that suffocates other teams out of games. They weren't really, able to suffocate USC out yet, but they had a very good game against them. I mean, arguably the best game I've seen them play all year. Definitely looked a lot better than the Texas game, and I think that if they played this way against Texas, it probably would have been a much closer game. Now, going on to the team that they beat, USC. Look, that was a tough loss, but that was probably the worst matchup that you could ask for as USC. Tell you about a USC team that's really fast, really field stretchy, really everything. And Will Johnson was able to do his thing. He had himself a pick six, but Miller Moss still looked pretty good, having about 300 yards and 3 touchdowns. And Joquavius Marks still threw up about 100. This USC team is definitely on the right direction, but this defense just could not keep up with the size and run attack of Michigan. Um, Moving on, a team that we just talked about uh, with Penn State is Illinois. Um, Big props to the Fighting Illini walking into Lincoln and defeating Nebraska 31-24 in overtime. They get the Nittany Lions next week. I think this is going to be a really good game if they can continue to do what they did. And really, that's just Luke Altmaier lean on your veteran talent, right? Make the smart decisions, continue to coach properly, and play your game of football. Penn State does a really good job of getting you out of your rhythm and making you play to their strengths. And if they can, and they forced Nebraska to do the same thing. And I think that if Illinois can do what they did to Nebraska against Penn State and keep it close, I think that experience and depth on this Illinois team will really be able to push them far. I would love to see another team kind of break into that upper tier of the Big Ten, especially where we do have polarizations in college football. So seeing a new team shine its head is always a fun thing to witness. Number 16, a team that seems to rise a little bit every week, is Iowa State with a throttling of Arkansas State 52-7. In my opinion, they're actually a very similar team to Illinois. Another just veteran players, veteran coach, and Matt Campbell. They find themselves in tight games where they seem to prevail, i.e., the Iowa game where they won 20-19. I mean, keeping composure. They have a good semblance of a pass game, good semblance of a run game. I really do think that this Iowa State team, as I say it every week, is another team that could be up there in the Big 12, which is looking more and more different every week as we see more upsets and more teams that we thought were really good end up not having as good of weeks. Speaking of teams having really good weeks, how about Clemson? 59-34 throttling over NC State. I just got to use throttling twice. Look, this offense had a really, really bad start, but this season is kind of feeling like an Alabama-esque year where an early loss in the national spotlight kind of allows them to quietly find themselves and could find themselves in an ACC championship. I'm sure that at this point, they probably Clemson has been in the spotlight for quite some time now, and they probably want maybe a little bit of peace and quiet. Let Dabo do his thing. Let him coach how he should coach. And while everyone else is watching, don't worry, Clemson. I'll still be watching. But if they can, go undefeated in conference play and continue to put up these gaudy, nearly 60+ point games every week, I see absolutely no reason why they're not going to find themselves in the ACC championship. Just when they find Miami, it'll be a very interesting thing to see. Back to the Big 12, a team that is pretty much just replacing the team they beat on this list. BYU dare I use throttled for a third time in a row? They throttled K-State 36-9. This was a crazy game. Avery Johnson looked terrible. 2 interceptions, only 130 yards. I mean, he wasn't even playing that well on the ground, and that's kind of his MO. Uh, BYU quarterback Jake Retzlaff looked really, really good. You know, made the majority of his passes. I think like an 80% completion percentage. Although it wasn't for that many yards, clearly whatever they were doing was working really well. And the good thing for BYU is they almost have Mizzou syndrome, where yes, they're a very good team, very talented team, but they have to play Utah at the very end of the season, which they were always going to. That's their in-state rivalry game, and they got an Oklahoma State, which who knows what Oklahoma State looks like now. I mean, granted they lost to Utah. I'm not saying that Oklahoma State is by any means not a good team anymore, but who knows what they'll be like in a month and a half, and what this BYU team and the perception around them could be in this month and a half. So good job, BYU. Love having new teams on the list and keep it up. LSU. I have been highly, highly critical on LSU this year. And I think that's mostly just because of the standard that has been set there. They beat UCLA 34-17, but being tied at half to a team as frankly as bad as UCLA this year doesn't feel that good. I mean, Brian Kelly still doesn't seem like his defense is playing exceptionally well. And look, the second half they held UCLA scoreless. Their defense looked much better, much different than I think I've seen all year. And if they can play like that, they'll be competitive in these good games. But they get Ole Miss in a couple weeks, and if we see first half of UCLA game LSU show up, they're going to get blown out of the water, and it's not even going to be close. They're still probably going to be a bowl game team. They're still probably going to be 6 to 8, maybe 9 wins, but what is that? Like, if you're an LSU fan, you're just 5 years removed from a national championship. You don't care about a bowl game. You care about making the playoffs. This LSU team can absolutely still do that. They're just going to have to find themselves on both sides of the ball. And frankly, they have barely found themselves on offense. I think this team absolutely has the talent to do so. It's just, can Brian Kelly get them there? All right, number 20. I finally decided to put Oklahoma State over Oklahoma. I think that's the first time I've done that this year. That's just because they didn't look as bad as Oklahoma. As I just talked about, Oklahoma State lost 19-22 against Utah. It was a tough one. They really, I thought, should have tried to capitalize more on Rising's absence, and they frankly just couldn't. I thought they were going to look much better than they did, but they didn't. Um, their run game is kind of what we were banking for them the entire year, as they had a as we talked about their veteran offensive line and how well they ran last year. Now they have an almost 100% return rate on that. And then 2 weeks ago, their run game was stifled, but then Alan Bowman threw for 300 plus yards and several touchdowns, and we're like, okay, so they can win in multiple ways. They can't really win in multiple ways unless they establish the run. And against a team like Utah, they couldn't establish anything. They really just didn't look good or look like they were playing their game. So if Oklahoma State can figure it out, which I think they can, because again, we're talking about these veteran teams that should be able to get it down the stretch. I think Mike Gundy's still one of the best coaches of college football. This is probably going to be one of his biggest tasks yet. And it's, again, Big 12 is still super wide open. It's not lost, but next time he sees Utah, if he gets to see Utah again, it's going to have to go a different way. And next time he sees Utah again, if he sees Utah again, they'll probably have Cam Rising. So he needs to figure out his stuff and have his team do a little bit of soul searching, and maybe get Ollie Gordon a little bit more juiced up before the rest of this season. Otherwise, they're going to take some more bad losses and very slowly and painfully fall into irrelevancy. Speaking of slowly and painfully falling into irrelevancy, Oklahoma lost 15-25 against Tennessee, and I've already talked about Tennessee a little bit, but they benched Jackson Arnold, and Michael Hawkins probably would have been benched too if he started the game. This RPO style offense is just not working, right? Dylan Gabriel worked better because he was just a better quarterback last year, but Jackson Arnold was just doing what he instinctively should have done. Then when he started doing a simpler, air raid offense, yeah, of course, a player with a big arm like Michael Hawkins is just going to be able to come in and air it out occasionally. Their defense kept them even remotely in this game, but it didn't ever really feel like they were in this game. And Tennessee just kind of walked in there, with a really young quarterback and showed them what's up. Oklahoma, if they're going to play like this the rest of the year, might as well hang it up, right? I mean, I'm never going to actually advocate for a team giving up, but it's going to get really ugly really quickly if they can't figure out a lot of the stuff they're doing. Especially, they got Texas, they got Ole Miss, they got a really, really, really tough schedule this year. So I hope they figure it out for their sake and Sooner Nation's sake. But right now, it is not looking good in Norman. They've already named Michael Hawkins Jr. the starting quarterback for next week. All right, team that I've talked about, but Notre Dame. They beat Miami of Ohio 28-3. Kind of finally looking like that Notre Dame team that we thought we were going to see in the beginning of the year. I believe that Riley Leonard threw his first touchdown of the season last week. He had rushed for a few, but I believe he actually threw one this week. I believe also he still led the Irish in both passing and rushing yards with a few touchdowns on the ground as well. Look, he clearly can use his legs, and there's got to be something that uh, that Coach Marcus Freeman can do to ease it for him a little bit. But this week they get another tough matchup. But I think that's the best thing that could happen with Notre Dame right now. Louisville climbing the list and looking really good for Notre Dame is awesome because I think that Notre Dame needs these quality wins to put them back in the conversation for the playoffs. Right now, Notre Dame doesn't have the strength of schedule to get back in the playoffs, but if they beat Louisville and they beat USC convincingly and don't lose any more games, they could absolutely find themselves in a spot like that come playoff time. And I think that they need to take full advantage of this opportunity if they are going to actually make a run at this thing. They don't have the conference championship to try to fall back on. They just have to hope that the teams on their schedule are going to be propped up by public image and play really well in order for them to get more quality wins. And this Louisville game this weekend is a perfect opportunity for them to do that. I think this Notre Dame team is still a very talented team, and I don't want to get too discouraged by the Northern Illinois loss. Things happen, but it's still just because Louisville now looks good and it's been a gift to them doesn't mean they're going to actually win. They still have to go out there and win that game. All right, number 23. I may have gotten this jersey just a week too late. Maybe took a little bit to get in, but Nebraska, pretty devastating loss for them. Dylan Raiola looked pretty good, as I already mentioned earlier. They lost 24-31. He's a freshman. This team is still a very talented team around him, and it's a young team, and that's kind of the opposite of what I've been talking about all year. There's a lot of these teams that are winning these close games just because they are more veteran, even if they don't necessarily have the talent that these teams have. They're more veteran. They're just better. Nebraska fans have plenty of things to look forward to going into the upcoming seasons. Raiola still got a few more years there. I don't think Matt Rule's planning on going anywhere. And this team will just continue to develop. And maybe in a couple years, when we look back, we'll be like, wow, that team really did have the potential. And we'll be able to see Nebraska much higher. Or NIL will take over, everyone will transfer out, and Nebraska will fall back into irrelevancy. But I hope that does not happen. As of now, Nebraska season's not over. They can still have a very successful season, especially by their standards. And yeah, and Illinois is just a good team. It was a tough loss, but I'm sure they'll bounce back. 24. Kind of replacing Memphis on this list, but welcome to the poll, Boise State. Memphis lost to Navy this week in a shocker. I did not see that happening, but because of that, the Broncos are now the sole shareholders on this group of 5 list. They were able to let's keep using the word throttle Portland State 56-14, and running back Ashton Genty, he's averaging over 10 yards a carry through 3 weeks. That's insane. Really 4 weeks, but he only played 3. Right? He's far and away, I think, the best running back in college football, and he's right now number 3 on my Heisman watch list right now. He should have if it ended today, he should absolutely find himself in New York. It's gonna be difficult for a group of 5 running back to make a real claim at Heisman, but look, if he continues to play like he's playing and he puts up 23 plus 100 yards this season and a couple handfuls of touchdowns, who knows what could happen. I would surely advocate for him to be on the Heisman list right now, but I don't get a vote in that. And Boise State, I know I put them on with a loss, but it was a very quality loss. It was a loss to number 8 Oregon, which tough loss, right? That's a very respectable loss to it's a quality loss to a very good team that they only lost by 3 points. It was a very close game. So a group of 5 taking a top 10 team to within 3 points with a maybe the best running back in college football will absolutely take that. Number 25, rounding out the list, our last newcomer of the week, it has to be, is the Rutgers Scarlet Knights. They beat Virginia Tech 26-23. Don't make me regret this, Scarlet Knight Nation. I put you on last year, and almost you immediately proved me wrong. I'm kind of setting myself up for this again, potentially with Wisconsin, Washington, and Nebraska on as your next 3 games. But got a new quarterback, Aiden Kaliak-Manis. Kai Minangai, your running back, has been really, really good. Look, and he's been putting up weekly personal bests on a weekly basis. I think you guys have a very talented team. I think Rutgers could absolutely make a run at just continuing to look really, really good and definitely make some respectable bowl games. At this point, I would have a really hard time seeing them make the playoffs. That would be pretty from the rafters. But you know, have a good season. Have a good season, Rutgers. And that being said, that concludes the top 25. My honorable mentions for this week were James Madison, Washington State, Indiana, Boston College, Iowa, Kansas State, Liberty, Western Kentucky, Colorado, and UCF. If you haven't pieced it together by me talking about it, my Heisman watch goes from 1 to 5. Cam Ward, Travis Hunter, Ashton Genty, Quinn Ewers, and Jackson Dart. My top games of the week to watch. On the top of your list should be Georgia, Alabama. But after that, in no particular order, Washington, Rutgers, BYU, Oklahoma State, Wisconsin, USC, Louisville, Notre Dame, Colorado, UCF, Illinois, Penn State, and Washington State, Boise State. It's going to be a really fun week of college football, everybody. Go out there, watch some football, and I hope your team wins.